Hello everyone. In this video, we're going to talk all about elasticity. So with elasticity, we're going to talk about income elasticity, and then we're also going to talk about the price elasticity of demand determinants. So with the existence of substitutes, things are going to become more elastic, meaning that if there's alternatives available, that's going to be what you're more interested in purchasing as prices change for one particular good. It's also important to keep in mind that the share of your budget that's spent on a particular good will determine how elastic the price is for that particular good, how much time you have, and the definition of that good, whether it's normal or inferior, or if it's something that's a necessity or a luxury. And then also the most common formula versus the midpoint formula is something that we'll look at a little bit later on in other videos. But a good is considered elastic if the elasticity of demand is less than -1, and it's inelastic if the elasticity of demand is greater than -1. We'll talk more about what those mean a little bit later. So remember, we have inferior and normal goods. We have cross price elasticity, meaning substitutes and complements. And then we have to figure out if there's flexibility for alternatives or if there is a time adjustment, meaning do we have time to adjust? So here's a question for you. What do you do if gasoline prices rise by 10%? A lot of you will think that, well, you're just going to have to buy it anyway. But for some people, a 10% increase might mean that they're not able to buy gas at all. Now, would your answer change if we were talking about a 10% rise in the price of a Big Mac? And the answer for a lot of people is yes. Gasoline is more of a necessity, so it's likely that even with a price increase, you would still buy it. But with a Big Mac meal, it's not necessarily a necessity, and there are quite a few substitutes for that. So the question of if you would purchase it or not, Big Macs are more elastic than gasoline. Gasoline is inelastic because most people don't have that access to substitutes or alternatives, whereas a Big Mac is more elastic because we are able to just pick something else. So elasticity, by definition, is just a measure of the responsiveness of buyers and sellers to changes in price or income. It's useful because when price or income changes, we want to determine how much buyers and sellers will change their behavior. First up, we want to look at the price elasticity of demand. So this is a measure of the responsiveness of the quantity demanded when there's changes in price. And it tells us the sensitivity of the relationship between those two variables. So recall that law of demand, the demand curve is downward sloping. And this tells us the direction of the relationship between those two variables. Demand will be elastic if the quantity demanded changes significantly as the result of a price change. So elastic means sensitive or very responsive. It's inelastic if the quantity demanded changes only a small amount as a result of a price change. So inelastic means insensitive or unresponsive. An alternative is to think about like rubber bands to make up a bouncy ball. If a ball is bouncy and you drop it on the floor, it bounces back. It's elastic. There's a pretty rapid change. But if you have a bowling ball, it's inelastic. When you drop it, it just stays on the floor. It's unresponsive. So elastic is responsive or sensitive. Inelastic is insensitive or unresponsive. So what determines if a good is elastic or inelastic with regards to demand? Well, the existence of substitutes is a big one. This determines the options that consumers have as the price is changing. If there's a lot of substitutes, demand will be very elastic. And if there's few substitutes, demand will be inelastic. Goods that have a lot of substitutes are toiletries, so like toothpaste, deodorant, shampoo, breakfast cereals, fruits and vegetables, and also fast food. Goods that have few substitutes are things like clean drinking water, electricity, gasoline, insulin, and other medications. The share of the budget is also a big determinant of the price elasticity of demand. Big ticket items have very elastic demand, meaning if the price changes, the amount demanded will change as well. But cheaper items are going to have a more inelastic demand because people won't really notice changes in price as much. A good way to think about this is that you would react more to a 20% sale on a vehicle versus a 20% sale on a candy bar. Another thing that affects the price elasticity of demand is necessity versus luxury. This affects the options that the consumer faces. Luxuries have elastic demand, while necessities are inelastic. Necessities are going to be things like electricity, internet, gasoline, your cell phone service, clean water, medication, toilet paper. And then if we look at other possible luxuries, those are things like vacations, dining out, jewelry, designer clothes. Anything that a 10% change might affect how you respond to purchasing it or not, your luxuries versus your necessities, you're going to notice a difference. Now, whether or not the particular market is broadly or narrowly defined will affect the options that a consumer faces. If it's narrowly defined, there will be elastic demand, and if it's pretty broadly defined, there will be inelastic. So broadly defined markets are things like ice cream, breakfast cereal, cars, and TVs. But more narrowly defined markets are things like Breyer's French vanilla ice cream, Kellogg's Frosted Flakes, a Toyota RAV4. This is when it's a more specific brand, and that's going to cause a good to become more elastic because people will notice that change a little bit more. The time and adjustment process, this is going to affect the ability of consumers to respond to changes in prices. If there's a long time horizon, it will have an elastic demand versus a short time horizon that has an inelastic demand. There are 3 time periods that we care about: the immediate run, the short run, and the long run. In the immediate run, we have no time to adjust our behavior, so it's going to be perfectly inelastic. Whereas in the short run, consumers could partially adjust their behavior versus the long run when we could fully go ahead and adjust to market conditions. Over time, consumers will be more able to find substitutes. They'll be more able to adjust for price changes in other ways. They'll maybe just consume less of that good. So things like gas consumers shifting to more fuel efficient cars or using public transportation. A good example of when we don't really have any time to make a decision would be a medical emergency. You don't really typically look up your insurance and which hospitals and network if it's a scenario where you have to go ahead and just act rather quickly. We'll go ahead and wrap this video up with a practice what you know question. So in terms of price elasticity of demand, which of the following goods do you think is the least elastic or the most inelastic? And the correct answer here is going to be electricity to power your home. For the new house, you could look for a used house. For a specific brand of cereal, you could just swap, or a new vehicle, you could go used, or you have a lot of substitutes. But electricity does not have any viable substitutes, so that would be the most inelastic of these particular items. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Otherwise, you can go ahead and head over to watch the video on important formulas. Thank you.